Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So it's a beautiful day today, so I thought I would take you through some tips on how to set up the legendary BOSS DS-1 Distortion pedal. Okay, so some people love them, some people hate them, but this is a legendary pedal, used by Gary Moore, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Kurt Cobain. This has been used on thousands of records and it's legendary for a reason. Okay, so I just want to go through how I get the best out of it. Advice on the best guitar, a type of guitar to use with it, amp settings, and also the settings of the actual pedal. Okay, so right, just to begin with, what I've found is, the best sort of guitars to use with this, or the best sort of pickups, are actually, I think, Telecaster pickups, or in particular Telecaster bridge pickups. Now, the DS1 is famous for lacking, a bit of mid-range. It's got that scooped EQ curve, right? Now, with something like a Les Paul with humbuckers, I've found that it does sort of compress the signal a little bit too much, becomes a little bit too mushy. On something like a Strat, with the lower output type single coils, I've found there's not enough oomph. But I've found something like this, and this is just a square Infinity Series Telecaster. But if you check out the videos, I've installed some Fender Custom Shop Texas Specials in here, which are very sort of mid-rangey, very porky, and these seem to work brilliantly with the DS1 because it fills in that mid scoop. It compensates for that, but it doesn't give you too much compression. Now, one of the things that I love about the DS1 is it's not like a Tube Screamer, or more recently I've got myself a Electro Harmonix Soul Food. It doesn't compress the signal. It's a very big sounding pedal if you set it up correctly. So anyway, yeah. So for the guitar, I've got the best results with the Telecaster. A little bit higher output than a Strat, not as high output as something like Les Paul with humbuckers, but it's just the right balance. Okay, so now let's just get onto the pedal, which some people have said this is sort of very fiddly to set up. It's a very twitchy pedal to set up, and actually, I disagree with that. I think it's a very simple pedal, right? 3 knobs: volume, tone, and distortion, right? I would recommend the best settings for this is max out the volume, max out the gain, and start with the tone at around about 9 o'clock to begin with, right? Now, I know what you're going to see. If you max out the volume, you're not going to really be able to use this to switch on and off with a clean amp. But because I believe the DS1 to be a really dynamic pedal that cleans up really well, you don't really need to switch it off. This can be always on. And so say, for example, you can go from full distortion and you can roll your guitar volume off and you're back to clean. I'll just turn up the amp up a little bit. So, the pedal is very dynamic, so it doesn't matter that the volume on the pedal is maxed. I don't think. You don't need to switch it on and off. Have it always on, and just, if you want it clean, you are capable of backing off the guitar volume to get a clean sound. Also, why have the distortion up max? Well, if you've got the distortion up max, you've got the full range of the gain available, right? You've got max gain. I'll turn it down a bit. That's 40. I'm using a Fender Frontman, I think, 35 amp sorry, 25R, which is very on-offy. I'm not using my Marshall today. I just wanted to go through a Fender clean amp so you can see what this sounds like. Yeah, but anyway, I digress. Yeah, you've got the full range of the gain available, which you don't need to use all the time. You can just back it off. And it cleans up great. You know, I think it cleans up better than a lot of pedals. Cleans up better than a Tube Screamer. You know, cleans up better than an SD-1. You know, something with that mid-range. You know, the fact of the matter is, you know, that mid-scoop is actually giving you that extra dynamics, I think. Very fiddly amp this, very fiddly. That'll have to do. Yeah, anyway, so that's the gain. You know, a lot of people recommend you do these full gain. I mean, what some people have said is if you've got the volume of the pedal up max, it introduces a bit more treble and a bit more fizz, but I don't think that's right. And do you know what it is? You've always got the tone control on your guitar, you know, to tame any fizz. So going over to the tone control, right? Now this is the key thing. This is the only thing that I really adjust on this pedal, the tone. You know, set at 9 o'clock. Any higher than that, this is now 10 o'clock. You know, if you want to introduce a little bit more top end, it's available. But I prefer to just keep it backed off to about 9 o'clock or below. But it is twitchy, right? It is twitchy. It will need, you know, use your ears. But it's, you know, I don't think it's that difficult to get into that sweet spot of you've got just enough treble content, but backing off, you know, and the guitar volume is still getting you back to those clean sounds, right? So that's how I would set up the pedal, right? And you just use it as my main sort of overdrive, and then put a boost pedal after it for a volume hike if you want, and also to introduce some mids back in it, which I've done with my AHX Soul Food. Now, coming up, you know, talking about amp settings, right? Now I think this is the key thing. Now, the DS-1, you know, it does introduce a lot of bass and low mids into the equation, okay? So I would just have the mids maxed out on your amp, whatever that is, even if it's a Fender, you know, whatever it is, you will be able to get a good tone out of it if you've just got the mids boosted. And also because there's, you know, there's a hell of an amount of bass, just cut the bass as well, right? Just so I've got treble slightly backed off from noon. I've got mids up full, and bass just off because all the bass is being generated by the pedal really, or at least it's not being taken away from the pedal. And that gets you this. You know, a lot of people have said, like, you know, this is like a metal 80s sounding pedal, right? But to me, I think this is just very, very full sounding, thick, you know, overdrive distortion, you know? Very dynamic, you can just play with the guitar volume. All the way back to clean. So, yeah, I mean, if you're just going to approach this, you know, without considering those options, right? So say, for example, you've just got a clean amp a clean Fender amp there, all the EQs at noon, right? And if we were to just set the DS1, everything at noon, this is what you would get. Which sounds fizzy and lifeless and flat and terrible, right? So just by backing off the bass of the amp, boosting the mids, backing off the tone, maxing out the volume and the tone, you get this. There's still a bit of fizz in there, so you've got two options, right? You can either just, well, you've got three options. Dial it back on the pedal, dial it back on the amp, dial it back on your tone control and your guitar. You've got full control with the DS1. Now, that's all great, I mean, but what I will say about the DS1, I think the one thing that I'm lacking with it, and which, you know, would be nice to have really, you know, is the harmonic feedback is a little bit, well, it's harder to get because you haven't got those mids. So we've tried to reapply it with the amp. We've tried to back off, you know, the tone control on the pedal, you know, but you know, the sustain is there, right? But I'm struggling to get it to sort of slide into harmonic feedback as easy as I would like something like a blues driver or something like that. But I think it's a good trade-off because you've got all those extra benefits. I know the blues driver cleans up as well, but you've got that huge bass and, you know, low mid push, which is just something different, isn't it? You know, and you imagine that boosted with a mid-focus pedal like the Soul Food, then you're into that, you know, harmonic feedback territory if you want it. Or put an EQ pedal maybe before the DS1 if you wanted that. But I think for a single pedal, you know, do I want to switch that off for something like a Tube Screamer, which could slide into that feedback a little bit better, but not having that sort of lovely uncompressed quality to the sound, you know, that note definition, the cleaning up on the guitar volume. I love that. I love that about the DS1, and not a lot of people mention that really, how versatile it is and how dynamic it is, and the note definition. You know, anybody talks about are those, you know, those guitar friendly mid frequencies that the DS1 does lack, but I think it makes up for it in many, many other ways. Anyway, I am waffling. If you're enjoying the content, I really appreciate, you know, click on that subscribe button, click on the bell. More to come. Yeah, I've got full reviews on the DS1 out there already. Reviews on everything really. Check out the channel. I waffle about guitars and pedals and amps and songs and music production and stuff like that. Guitar Jody, check it out. Thanks for watching. See you in a bit. Bye.